You know, it is funny. It seems like this is the sixth 2024 Big Ten schedule we've gotten. It's kind of ridiculous because of all the realignment, the changes of the schedule. I think this is the third different variation of it. But guys, we do have the official Big Ten 2024, 2025, 2026, 2027, and 2028. I don't know why I said all those years, but we have the full Big Ten schedule. I'm going to be mainly focusing on 2024, which is next year, and talking about what are we to look at in terms of who these teams are facing, who got screwed, who got easy opponents. We are going to begin. I'm kind of just going to go through, I guess, kind of the bigger teams, honestly. So I think we'll start with Iowa. You can see the away games are in white. So Iowa at Maryland, at MSU, at Minnesota, at Ohio State. So Iowa will be traveling to Ohio State next year, and at UCLA. How about Iowa going to the Rose Bowl? They get Nebraska at home. They get Northwestern at home. Washington travels to Kinnick, possibly a night game there. And then, of course, Wisconsin. Moving on to the far right, you can see Michigan. They get Illinois away, Indiana, Ohio State, and Washington. Certainly Ohio State and Washington going to be tough games, but if I do want to, try and be optimistic for Michigan fans, Washington going to be losing a ton of talent. They might have 3 or 4 first-round picks, and obviously their quarterback, Michael Penix, he's going to be graduating on the road at MSU, at Minnesota, at Northwestern, at Oregon, and at USC. So for Michigan, certainly going to be a tough schedule because they also face Texas. We're going to get to their kind of overall schedule later, but I don't think it's as crazy as people are saying with USC losing Caleb Williams, with Oregon losing, Bo Nix. Those teams are still going to be good, don't get me wrong, but I do think there's going to be some step back from those programs, breaking in new quarterbacks. Moving on to Oregon in the bottom left, you can see away games at Michigan. So they're going to go to the Big House. What a weird game that is. That's a conference game at Purdue, at UCLA, and at Wisconsin. So Oregon traveling to Purdue. And that's just crazy to think about. And then their home games, they get Illinois at home, Maryland, Michigan State, Ohio State. That's the big one, Ohio State at home. They're going to Oregon. We remember a few years ago, there was a home and home. One of the games got canceled because of the pandemic, but the other one, Oregon won at Ohio Stadium, and then they get Washington at home there as well. Moving on to Ohio State, you can see their away games, Michigan State, Northwestern, Oregon, and Penn State. So 2 easier games, 2 tough games there at Penn State and at Oregon. We'll have to see if the Penn State game is a whiteout game. It'll probably be big noon, let's be honest. And then moving on to the home games for Ohio State. So Indiana, that's a free win. Iowa, Michigan at home, of course, Nebraska, and Purdue. What a very boring home slate for Ohio State, so kind of lame there. Moving on to Penn State, they get Minnesota on the road, so they travel to Minnesota. They go to Purdue, they go to USC, so there you go. Penn State traveling to the Coliseum, probably. I wonder what time that game will be at. It can't be at 10 o'clock. It'll probably be a 7 o'clock game, 4 o'clock Pacific start time, I'm guessing. And then also they go to Wisconsin. And then their home games, Illinois, Maryland, Ohio State, UCLA at home, and Washington at home. So Washington goes to Penn State. UCLA goes to Penn State as well. We're going to move on to the other side now. Take a look at Michigan State, whoever their new head coach is. They're going to be facing. The away games are in white. So it is kind of annoying that they put the away games first. Isn't it in a presentation? Normally the home games would go first, but at Illinois, at Maryland, at Michigan, at Oregon. So Michigan State traveling to Oregon. They recently had a home and home, or I guess it's not recently, but when Marcus Mariota was on Oregon, they had a home and home with Michigan State. I think they split that, I think Oregon won both games. And then their away games or their home games, Indiana, Iowa, Ohio State, Purdue, and Rutgers. Kind of boring there. And then we're going to move on to UCLA in the bottom left. You can see they get their away games. They go to Nebraska. They go to Penn State. They go to Rutgers. There it is, UCLA at Rutgers. Noon start time in mid-December in 25-degree weather. There you go. We'll have to see when that game actually is. None of the none of the dates or times have been given out yet. And then they also are at Washington, no surprise there, trying to mitigate the travel. And then their home games, they get Indiana at home. How about Indiana going to the Rose Bowl? Hilarious. Iowa, Minnesota, and then Oregon and USC. And then moving on to USC's schedule, away games, they go to Maryland. Imagine that's a noon start time, 9 a.m. I guess they just did have a 9 a.m. game against Colorado because of how dumb Big Noon is. But then they're at Michigan as well, so that's going to be a huge game. USC going to the Big House. They're also at Minnesota, UCLA, and Washington, and then their home games, Nebraska, they go to the Coliseum. Penn State does. Rutgers travels to the Coliseum, as does Wisconsin. It's just crazy to see this, honestly. This is what college football is. There's bigger games, and it's just going to get crazier and crazier as more and more expansion happens. And then Washington. So I think Washington's going to have a tough time next year replacing all that talent, but you can see their away games. They travel to Indiana, Iowa, Oregon, Penn State, and Rutgers. That's a hard road schedule. And then their home schedule, Michigan, Northwestern, UCLA, USC. That's a very tough schedule for Washington. And then Wisconsin, their away games at Iowa, Nebraska, Northwestern, Rutgers, USC. And then their home games, Minnesota, Oregon, Penn State, and Purdue right there. And then we are going to kind of go in depth on some of these schedules because they're pretty much already set outside of the dates again. So beginning with Ohio State, and I have to say, this is the exact opposite of this year with Ohio State and Michigan. So look at Ohio State's non-conference next year. Southern Miss, Western Michigan, Marshall. A virtual guaranteed 3-0 start for the Buckeyes. Horrible non-conference, very similar to Michigan. And those are the first 3 weeks. You can see those games already set. August 3rd. Oh, no, they're not the first 3 weeks. So they're probably going to face someone else, a Big Ten team, on September 14th. But those games are terrible. And then you can see Ohio State at MSU, at Northwestern, at Oregon. Oregon, the tough road game. But other than that, then at Penn State at the way bottom. So they're at Oregon and at Penn State. That's not easy. You do have Indiana at home, Iowa at home, Michigan at home, Nebraska, and Purdue. But yeah, that schedule, when you're talking about a 12-team playoff, you would think Ohio State is a virtual lock. I mean, we'll see with their quarterback situation, but that's a very easy schedule, and you can virtually lose 2 games and still make it. And then we get to Michigan's, and this is what everyone's been talking about. So you can see Michigan, the first game against Fresno State. I have not looked at Fresno State's roster, so I don't know if they're an extreme veteran team, but that is very important in determining how good Fresno State is going to be next year. Really, we don't even know how good Fresno State is going to be, this year. They are undefeated. They are ranked. This could potentially be a huge home game for Michigan. Well, I wouldn't say huge, but it just depends what Fresno State returns. They obviously don't recruit well, so if they lose a bunch of their seniors, they're going to fall back to the pack. But then you have Texas the week right after at home, very likely at that point starting Arch Manning, because we would expect Quinn Ewers to go to the draft. And then they do have one easy non-conference game, Arkansas State. And then looking at their conference schedule, at Illinois, at Indiana, those are very manageable. You've got the rivalry with MSU at home. You've got Minnesota at home. You've got Northwestern at home. Those are all relatively easy. But now you can see Oregon at home, USC at home, at Ohio State, at Washington. Again, if I was to give Michigan fans some optimism, we really don't know how good Fresno State's going to be next year. They don't recruit well. They might lose. They might lose 3 or 4 games this year and fall back to the pack in the Mountain West. The Mountain West, they face a Wyoming team this week. They might lose that game. And then you take a look at teams like Oregon and Washington, guaranteed going to be breaking in new quarterbacks. And USC. USC is breaking in a new QB as well. Of course, Michigan probably is themselves with J.J. McCarthy. We would expect going to the draft, but we'll see. But yes, that is a very tough schedule for Michigan. You would think they'd be able to lose 3 games, go 9-3, and still get like an 11th or 12th spot when it comes to the playoff. This is just modern day Big Ten, modern day football. The schedules are going to be really tough. We're trying to eliminate as much fluff as possible. As I say that, we just went over the Ohio State schedule, but still, and Ohio State normally schedules one good, non-conference opponent. That was just kind of a thing in 2024 where I think they canceled someone. And then moving on to USC, you can see they've got a neutral site game versus LSU. That game's already set at 7:30 on ABC. Okay, so that's the Sunday night game. USC, LSU. I can't even make any type of prediction. They're both going to be breaking in new QBs. I would guarantee they're both ranked. First game of the season, Allegiant Stadium. And then they get Utah State. And then their other non-conference game is Notre Dame, the rivalry game in late November. That is a brutal non-conference schedule for USC. And then taking a look at their conference schedule, at Maryland, at Michigan, at Minnesota, at UCLA. They get Nebraska at home, Penn State at home, Rutgers, Wisconsin at Washington. That is a brutal schedule, ladies and gentlemen. Penn State at home. Think of UCLA is going to be good, guys. Seriously, you do not want to see UCLA on the schedule over the next 2 years with their true freshman QB, Dante Moore, learning more. You know, they're going to be a really good team, top 25 team for the next 2 or 3 years. You've got at UCLA, you've got at Michigan, you've got a home game with Notre Dame, a neutral site game with LSU, a home game with Penn State, a home game with Wisconsin, at Washington. And that does not look like a fun schedule. And then moving on to Penn State, at West Virginia. I mean, West Virginia's kind of had a nice start to this year, but you would think that'd be a relatively easy win for Penn State. Penn State should actually, well, I don't know. I actually don't think Penn State's going to be better next year. I was going to say that because, you know, their quarterback's going to be returning, but they're going to be losing a bunch, including their best tackle, including their best cornerback. Penn State's probably going to have 3 or 4 first-round picks this coming year. It'll be interesting to see if Penn State tries to get a true number 1 receiver in the transfer portal this offseason, but that's another story for another day. You would expect, you know, that's a very easy non-conference at West Virginia, Bowling Green, Kent State. Those are the first, or I guess they do stagger them, August 31st, September 7th, September 21st. And then the conference schedule at Minnesota is manageable, Illinois at home, Maryland at home. They get Ohio State at home, possibly their whiteout game. They get UCLA at home. They get Washington at home. And then they're at Purdue, at USC, at Wisconsin. So, you know, kind of manageable because you get Ohio State at home. You're at USC, but if you want to be optimistic, USC's not going to have Caleb Williams at that point. At Wisconsin's always annoying, but it's another one that can be manageable. And then we are going to take a look at UCLA's schedule. How about at Hawaii? You've got to be kidding me. At Hawaii, the Ching Complex, my goodness. Fresno State, oh no. That's actually a tough non-conference schedule, at Hawaii and versus Fresno State. I don't know why they're playing at Hawaii. At LSU, Wait, LSU faces both USC and UCLA? I don't know if that's right. At LSU in week 3 or week 4. And then their conference schedule, at Nebraska, at Penn State, at Rutgers. Yes, UCLA going to Rutgers versus Indiana, versus Iowa, versus Minnesota, Oregon and USC, and then at Washington. So they certainly face all those West Coast teams, so it's going to be easier for them in terms of travel. You know, that game at Penn State's not going to be fun. The game at LSU's not going to be fun. The game at Washington's probably going to be tough. And then, you know, kind of going back to the Pac-12 matchups with Oregon and USC, of course, unfortunately for UCLA, when you face teams like Oregon and USC, you also get to face teams like Arizona, Arizona State, you know, Colorado. You're not going to be facing those teams this year. Well, I guess Colorado's decent now, but, you know, I'm just saying there's not that many filler teams. You do get, you know, at Rutgers is easy, Indiana's easy, Iowa's manageable, Minnesota's manageable, at Nebraska's probably going to be manageable, but it is still a really tough schedule. So, guys, I just wanted to go through some of the schedules with the Big Ten schedule release 2024 through 2028. That's going to do it for this video. Make sure you're following me on X. Link to that's always in the description.